All right, well, let's get started. So a reminder, you can chat and ask questions in the webinar. The chat box is there. It should be on the right of your YouTube video or at the bottom if you're watching on your phone. And that's one of the best things about this as well. If you have an issue, keep in mind, you can check it on your phone. You can watch this. It's just YouTube. Anywhere you can watch YouTube, you can be watching this. And thanks so much to everybody checking in. I'll say, Craig, the check-ins have gotten a little bit more feverish here now. We got Sudbury, St. Albert, Kamloops, BC, Oakville, Kitchener, Ontario, Laval, Quebec. We got some Mississauga. So still a lot of GTA, Ottawa heavy. So the greater Toronto area, and but quite a few more people on there. Now, these webinars, I just want to remind everybody of Royal LePage's promise to you. And we're here to help you maximize your earning potential by providing you with powerful business tools, access to leads and referrals, and training for all stages of your career that builds your skills. And that's why we put together this Sales Success webinar series for you. Every month, we're inviting a training expert, somebody who comes in and knows what they're talking about, to talk to you all about your sales development. So I'm really happy for everybody who tuned in today live. You're going to get a wonderful webinar and the opportunity to ask questions, which is such a huge advantage. Of course, all of these are housed as well in the RLP network. You can go to rlpnetwork.com under training, webinar training. You'll see sales success. You click on that and you'll have access to our webinar library where you can actually look by presenter, by topic, by air date, and find webinars based on what you're needing. If you're looking for something to focus on your listing presentations this year, or your prospecting, or whatever it might be, or even something just to keep you motivated, go check out the webinar library and you'll find something for that. So that said, that's my quick little introduction. Craig, you're still here, right?
I'm still here.
Awesome. Now, I'm going to turn things over to Craig, but I really want to give you a little bit of understanding of where Craig is coming from. Now, Craig, he's worked in real estate full-time as a sales agent, a branch manager, and an educator since 1992, specializing in income-producing real estate. And that's what he really focuses on. He's helped hundreds of clients achieve their dreams of financial freedom by building really strong real estate portfolios of self-funding, self-sustaining properties that create mailbox income. I don't know. Is that an industry term?
It is here.
Okay, gotcha. I was like, this is the first time. I usually just get the mailbox outcome. That's the bills. It's a bad joke. Sure. Now, that said, as an instructor, he's taken all his lessons, everything he's learned, and taught countless real estate agents and individual investors these simple techniques and time-proven strategies to build, maintain, and profit from an income-producing real estate portfolio. And he's also translated that into his books, using all of his experiences to put together his book's Destination Perpetuity. And he informed me just before we started that he's actually working on a new book, Learn It, List It, Sell It, which will also, talk about the whole process that he's going to walk some of us through today. So without further ado, I want to turn things over to Craig.
Well, thank you, Mike, for that introduction. Very excited to be here. As per Mike's introduction, my name is Craig O'Rourke, and I've written a book entitled Destination Perpetuity. The premise of the book is to introduce the reader to the idea of investing in what I believe to be by far the greatest investment available to us today, and that's income-producing real estate. The reason I think income-producing real estate is such a great investment is because it's a way to build what I believe to be true wealth. So I understand there's about 600 agents listening today, and if I took the opportunity to ask each and every one of you what you believed true wealth to be, I would imagine I would get several different answers. I mean, one agent might say, well, if I had $500,000, I'd feel wealthy. Another might say, if I had $1 million, I'd feel wealthy. Someone might say 10 million. But my point is, every time I ask that question, I usually get a set amount. In other words, a finite answer. But I don't believe true wealth to be a finite amount of money. As a matter of fact, I believe it to be the reverse. I believe it to be an infinite amount of money. And that's why I like income-producing real estate, because I believe it can build an infinite amount of money. You see, to me, true wealth is safe, secure, dependable cash flow. It's money you can count on month after month, year after year, and decade after decade. The reason I like income-producing real estate so much is because income-producing real estate is self-funding, because the money comes from the tenant's rents, and it's therefore a self-sustaining investment. When you have a self-funding and self-sustaining investment, you create an investment that becomes an annuity for life, a stream of cash that will last forever. truly an infinite amount of money. Now, I was asked recently how I got the idea for this book, and it came to me rather organically. When I was in my 20s, 30s, and 40s, conversations with my peers and coworkers were very carefree conversations. We talk about where to get the best happy hour deal, playing beach volleyball or rock climbing. But I'm a baby boomer, and about the time I turned 50, those conversations started to change. We started to talk things about knee replacements, Lipitor, and Social Security solvency. But of all these CARP related topics, the one that seemed to cause the most anxiety among people was the topic of retirement. Now, you would think that retirement would be the thing people would get really excited about. They'd say, hey, I'm going to retire. I'm going to travel the world. I'm going to write a novel. I'm going to sit on the beach and drink pina coladas. But that's not what I was hearing. What I was hearing was anxiety. When I'd ask people how or when they retire, they oftentimes shrug or say, I'm going to work till I die. I asked one friend when she was going to retire, she simply started to cry. And I thought, this is not good. And I thought, I know a better way. So I decided to write my book and share my thoughts. Now, I've been doing some speaking engagements all over the country, and recently was up in San Francisco, and I was speaking to a group of investors, real estate investors. And after my presentation, a woman stood up and she said, I really appreciated what you had to say, and I'm interested. But she said, there was something missing from your presentation. You didn't talk about your qualifications. And I said, what do you mean? She said, well, where did you study finance? And what degrees do you hold in finance? I told her, I said, I don't have any degrees in finance. I've never studied it. And she said, well, then what qualifies you to tell us how to invest our money? So I told her that I'd had a front row seat for almost my entire adult life, watching as a real estate portfolio started as a simple conversation around my family's dinner table and blossomed into a real estate portfolio that carried my parents through a very comfortable retirement for many, many years. Let me tell you how that came to be. My dad was a real estate broker, and he was rather successful, and he decided to open his own brokerage. So he was raising a family of 6 on just an inconsistent paycheck of commissions and brokerage fees. So when I was a young boy, about 8 or 9 years old, money was very inconsistent in my house. And my mother didn't like that at all. And every month she'd sit at the kitchen table and she'd pay the bills. And we'd hear her say, I don't like roller coasters. Roller coasters give me a stomach ache. Get me off this ride. Well, of course, she wasn't really talking about roller coasters. That was her metaphor for the inconsistency of the money that came through our household. Now, I didn't get it at the early age that she was using that as a metaphor, but I too, at an early age, had a gauge on my father's business. And that gauge was the dinner table. You see, I knew if we had spaghetti too many nights in a row, my dad did not have any clients. If there was spaghetti with meat sauce, I figured he got a listing. If there was chicken on the table, clearly something was under contract. But if I came home and smelled steak, contingencies have been removed. Now, it didn't matter to me. I liked chicken, steak, and pasta all the same, but it mattered to my mom. It mattered a great deal to her. And so I'll never forget the day this conversation came to be. I was sitting at the kitchen table doing my homework, 8 or 9 years old. My mom was standing there in front of the stove, stirring in another pot of spaghetti. And my dad came walking in the door. And my mother just looked at him, and my poor dad stopped dead in his tracks, and he knew something was up. He said, what's wrong? My mother said, what are you doing about our financial future? My dad was ill prepared for this question, and he stopped for a minute and he said, I work every day. And my mother said, I know, so do I. She said, but that wasn't the question. The question was, what are you doing about our financial future? And then she said, so he could not misunderstand the question, our retirement. Well, my dad was a real estate agent, so he always had an answer, right? So he scratched his head for a minute, and then he said, I'm going to work till I die. So my mom said, okay, that's fine. You go ahead and do that. You go ahead and work till you die. But what if you die first? What about me? And what about these kids? So my dad agreed that that was not a good plan. And after dinner that night, they sat at the kitchen table and they talked about all the possible ways to invest money. Now, of course, the obvious answer was to invest in real estate, right? My dad was a real estate agent. He sold income producing real estate for a living, and he obviously had made a lot of money for other people, but he didn't have enough money to buy a piece of income producing real estate. So that was a problem. That was not going to work, unfortunately. So they had to think of something else. So they talked about how they can invest a much smaller amount of money, and they decided to go and speak with my dad's friend, Don. Now, Don was a good friend of my dad's, and he invested people's money in the stock market. And what I remember about Don was he was always referenced as being the smartest guy we knew. And so I didn't know what this conversation about retirement investing was really, but when I knew my parents were going to talk to Don, I thought that sounded like a good idea. So a week or two went by, and when my dad came back from that appointment, I was very excited to see what Don had to say. I mean, this topic of investing had caused great anxiety in my house, and even at 8 or 9 years old, I could feel that. And so I ran up to my dad and I said, Dad, what did Don have to say? Where are you going to invest your money? And my dad simply said, son, we're not going with Don. And I said, why not? And my dad said, son, you're too young to understand all of this, but let me just put it this way. He said, Don wants to invest our money in the stock market, and your mother and I don't like that. Now, my parents had both been children of the Depression. So they had seen firsthand how devastating savings can be in the stock market. So I said, well, what are you going to do, Dad? He said, don't worry about it, son. He said, I'm going to invest our money. Now, I knew my dad was a smart guy, and I knew he invested for other people, so that answer satisfied me. But remember, my dad had a problem. My dad did not have enough money to buy a piece of income-producing real estate. So my dad was a smart guy. He took a page from my mom's playbook, and he decided to go to work the next day and talk to his coworkers and his friends and ask them how and when they planned on retiring. A lot of people said they were going to work till they die. A lot of people shrugged. Some of them cried. And he said, hey, I've got an idea. So he found a couple like-minded friends, and together they formed a partnership. They pooled their money, and they bought their first piece of income-producing property. And a few years later, another one. And a few years later, another one. And in a relatively short amount of time, chicken and steak became much more prevalent on our dinner table. Our week of camping for our summer vacation became 2 weeks in the Hawaiian Islands. The cash was flowing, the plan was working, and my parents were successful. They built a small portfolio of income-producing properties that generated positive cash flow while gaining value over time. And when they got to their desired retirement age, they were set. My parents had 20 years of worry-free retirement. Safe, secure, dependable cash flow funding them throughout their retirement. They lived in a beautiful home. They traveled. They ate out. They had a wonderful, wonderful retirement. But life changes, doesn't it? And about in 1999, my dad's good friend Don passed away. Now, this was really hard on my dad because my dad and Don had been very good friends, and I saw how upset he was. So I decided to go to the service with my dad. And we were driving home from the service. I told my dad, I said, Dad, the thing I remember the most about Don was that everybody used to say he's the smartest guy they knew. And my dad smiled and he said, son, Don was really smart. But he said, when it came to investing, your mother and I were smarter. And I said, why do you say that, Dad? I said, I remember you said that you didn't want to invest in the stock market. And my dad said, yes, son, that was part of it. But he said, you were too young to understand the whole story. So my dad told me what my parents really didn't like about Don's plan was the fact that the firm he worked for used actuaries. Now, for those of you who may not know what actuaries do when they work for an investment firm, they ask the potential investor a series of questions. They'll ask you how old you were, how old your grandparents were when they passed away, if your parents are alive. They'll ask what everyone died from. They'll ask if there's heart disease or diabetes or any other ticking time bombs in your bloodline. They ask these questions because they need to find these answers and compare them to mortality charts. That way they can make a determination of approximately how long you're going to live. They need to do that because they need to give that information to Don or guys like Don to figure out approximately how long your money needs to last. My parents didn't like that. They didn't like the idea of being told how long their money would last or how long they were going to live. So they decided to go into real estate instead, and it worked out very nicely. But why? Why does real estate work out better than other investments? Now, I put together a little side-by-side comparison. Remember now, I have no degrees in finance. This is just my own view, but I see things pretty simply in life. And I see most investments as having 4 phases. The first phase is the initial investment. So you simply pick a path. Now, for our example today, we're talking about real estate or the stock market. Those are the 2 most common things that people tend to invest in for the future. So certainly in phase 1, the initial investment phase, the stock market's easier to get into. I mean, you can have just a little bit of money and you simply pick the investment firm you want to work with, you sign a few contracts and you're off. With real estate, there's a little more heavy lifting in phase 1. I mean, you have to have a lot more money, don't you? And if you don't have that money, you've got to either borrow it or you've got to partner with somebody. You also have to find a building, you have to find a property manager. There's a lot more that goes on in phase 1, initial phase of investment. But what about the future phases? Let's look at phase 2 for a minute. Phase 2 is the continued funding phase. Now, no matter what investment you get into, it's probably going to need to be continually funded. Most people start with a small amount of money and a very aggressive retirement plan. And if you go to somebody like Don, men and women that handle investment dollars, they're going to say, well, thank you very much for choosing me. And I will do all I can to make sure that I pick the best stocks and I know the right time to buy, the right time to sell, the right time to hold. And I'll do everything I can on my end to grow this money. But you've given me a very small amount of money here. And in order to grow it, I'm going to need you to participate. So I'm going to need you to continually fund this. So investors like investment specialists like Don will ask you to send a check every month, month after month, year after year, decade after decade to help fund your investment. And that is called investor funding. And that is how most investments work. What about real estate? Well, real estate needs to be funded too. I mean, you've got your mortgage, you've got your taxes, you've got your insurance, you've got your property manager, and you better put some money away because the paint will peel, the roof will leak, tenants will move in and out, and you're going to have expenses. So you better have a slush fund as well. But here's what I like about real estate. Real estate, if you do it right, if you read my book, you follow the rules of the road, real estate, those dollars should be tenant funded. Your tenant should be funding your future retirement. The rents should cover the mortgage, the taxes, the insurance, the management, and also putting money away for a rainy day. That's the first thing I like about real estate is phase 2, the continued funding phase. I really like the idea of having somebody else fund my retirement. Now let's go to phase 3. Phase 3 is the fun part, the distribution phase. So let's fast forward. Let's say that you decided 65 was the age you wanted to retire at. And so with either one of these investment vehicles, be it real estate or stocks, bonds, you're going to create a plan. And you're going to, on that plan, determine how and when the asset will be fully funded so you can retire. So what happens with Don's plan? Well, you turn 65, Don calls you up and says, happy birthday and congratulations. Guess what? Put away your checkbook. Don't send me any more checks. We're fully funded and it's time to start the distributions. And that's what happens. Don starts sending you checks now. Every single month, Don sends you a check month after month, year after year, decade after decade. What about real estate? Same thing. You had a plan that got you to a fully funded real estate portfolio. Now, maybe the property is either paid off or paid down to a point that those checks, the excess rents coming in, now come to you. So in the distribution phase, these programs look very similar, don't they? But what about phase 4? Phase 4 is the continued asset growth. You see, the problem with Don's plan is that in order for you to have your retirement funded, the asset, the stocks, the bonds, the precious metals, whatever you invested in, must be sold off. So the asset must be continually diminished month after month, year after year, decade after decade, until it's gone. But with real estate, that's not the case. Remember, real estate is self-funding and self-sustaining, correct? So with real estate, the self-funding, self-sustaining nature of real estate creates an investment that provides distributions from the excess cash flow, not the asset itself. The asset is the real estate. You never sell the asset. This allows the asset to be left untouched and simply appreciate and grow in value, right? That's what my parents liked about real estate. They did not want to be given fixed parameters of time and money. What they wanted was reverse. They wanted and got infinite cash flow. What my parents did was they created an annuity for life, a stream of cash that lasts forever. And it's a really good thing they did that too, because the actuaries told my dad he lived to 75. He didn't listen. My dad lived 8 more years. He lived to the age of 83, 8 years beyond what the actuaries would have planned for. And in those additional 8 years, he never worried once about money, because he knew that next month there'd be more checks in his checking account. He just simply enjoyed his retirement. And my mom, she was told she lived to be 78. She also did not listen. My mother lived 20 more years. She lived to the age of 98. And even as a widow in her 90s, she never once worried about spending every dime in her checking account, because for almost 40 years, my mother saw her cash flow portfolio of real estate keep sending checks month after month, year after year, decade after decade. And in those 20 years from the time the actuaries had predicted she would pass in 1997, in those 20 years, what happened? Her assets continued to grow, not diminish, but continue to grow. Now, before my dad passed away, he told me that, he said, son, I want you to watch over your mom's portfolio. And I said, I will do that, Dad. And he explained everything to me. My parents had 4 pieces of property, and he explained to me that, you know, these different rent checks came in at different times, and that, you know, my mother would expect that check deposited the minute it came in. So I'd be making several trips to the bank. He explained all this to me in detail. And then after he passed away, I went back to my mom, and I told my mom that my dad had asked me to watch over things. And my mom said, no, I don't want you to do that, son. She said, you know, it's too much trouble for you. You have your own family and your own life. She said, I've got a good CPA. I'll hire a good bookkeeper. I'll take care of it. I said, Mom, Dad asked me to do this, and I'm going to honor that wish. So my mom said, okay, but I have to tell you, she said, you know, I have 4 properties. And I said, yes, I know that. And she said, you know, those 4 checks come in at different times of the month. I said, yes, I know that. So she said, you'll be going to the bank 4 times a month. And I said, well, Mom, no. I said, I'm going to put those all on automatic deposit. And my mom said, oh, no, not with my money. She said, you're going to deposit them in the bank. And she said, you're going to go to my branch. And I said, oh, no, Mom, one of my branches is right close by the house. I'll just go there. She said, no, my branch. I said, okay, I'll go to your branch and I'll deposit them in the ATM. And she said, no. Your father didn't trust ATMs, and I don't either. You'll go to my branch, and you'll go to window 6, and you'll talk to Maria. And I said, Mom, wait a second. I said, your branch has insanely long lines. She said, yes, I know. You better take a cup of coffee with you. And so I realized that the argument was going to get nowhere. And to honor my wishes for my dad, I decided to take everything on just as my mom wanted me to do. And so every week I ended up going to the bank, and I would go to my mom's branch, and I would talk to Maria at window 6, because that's the teller my mom wanted me to use. Now, this branch was very, very busy, and they would have very long lines. So as my mom predicted, I got in the habit of taking a cup of coffee and a newspaper with me, and I'd stand in that line, I'd wave at Maria, she'd wave back at me, she knew I was waiting for her window, and I'd sit back and start reading my paper. Well, on this one particular day, I noticed an interesting article in the paper, and it was money managers that had been interviewed, and they were asked a simple question. They were asked, what drives your clients? Is it greed or is it fear? And by an overwhelming 83%, the money managers said it was fear that drove their clients. And it made me laugh a little bit, because I was standing in this line at the bank, and I was looking around, and there were all these posters in the bank that said, invest now, ask us how, don't outlive your money, all these fear-based advertisements. I thought, wow, this bank is really knows their stuff, right? And there was one in particular that struck me, and it was a senior couple, and sitting on a little park bench having a picnic, and the headline read, will you outlive your money? And at the bottom it said, contact us to find the answers. And it made me laugh a little bit, because I was holding a check in my hands for $6,000. Now, this particular check was from one of the 4 properties my mom had, and that $6,000 represented her proceeds from that building. After the taxes were paid and the insurance was paid, the property manager was paid, these were her proceeds, $6,000 every month. And I wanted to stand up and I wanted to yell in front of the bank, I have the answer right here. But, of course I didn't do that, but I started thinking about that. And I thought, I started thinking about how this investment came to be. How did this $6,000 check get into my hands? And I remembered when my dad bought the building. It was 1976. And I remember exactly when he bought it because it was the same week I got my driver's license. And I remember the story he told about buying the building. You see, it had been a listing of his. And he'd gotten a listing in an area that was a little bit blighted, but he could see it as getting ready to gentrify. And his seller wanted to retire and move to a warmer climate. And so they were planning on selling this building, even though it wasn't the best market. So the seller put on a new roof and did some cosmetic maintenance. And my dad did all the advertising he could. Now, back then in the 70s, there was no MLS. The MLS was printed, right? And so what would happen is there was no internet. And so what would happen is the brokers would have to get on the phone and start calling people. So my dad would call every single one of his potential buyers, and then he'd call every agent in town. And he did this for weeks and weeks and weeks. And pretty soon he got pretty beat up and he realized this property just wasn't going to move because the area was a little sketchy. So my dad went back to his client, Bob, and he said, hey, Bob, I hate to tell you this, but we're not getting any action on the property. And Bob said to him, well, what do you mean, Mike? That was my dad's name, Mike. He said, what do you mean, Mike? He said, you said this was a great property in an up and coming area. He goes, my dad said, yeah, but I can't seem to convince other people of that. And he said, I think we're going to have to reduce the price. And Bob said, oh, no. We're not going to reduce the price. Absolutely not. He said, you'll have to come up with a better idea. So my dad thought about it for a little while, and interest rates were rather high at this point in time, and this was not that desirable an area. And my dad remembered that Bob owned the building free and clear, and he said, Bob, would you consider owner financing at a lesser financing rate than the banks are offering? And Bob said, sure, I'll do that. And he said, would you get really aggressive and maybe do 10 or 20% down? Bob said, I'll do 10% down if you bring me somebody with good credit and if they pay my full price. So my dad said, okay, let me get back to work. My dad's next phone call was to his friend Jim, who he invested a lot of real estate for. And Jim was a very trusted client. And he called Jim up and he told Jim about this building. Jim said, Mike, you've told me about this building so many times. I really don't want it. And my dad said to him, no, you got to listen, because now there's owner financing. You can buy it for 10% down. And my dad went on and on and on about how this was such a great area and it was gentrifying and he had to get in now. And finally, Jim said to him, Mike, I got a question for you. If this is such a great area, why don't you buy this building? My dad told Jim, he said, Jim, I'd love to buy this building. But he said, I'm embarrassed to tell you, I just don't have any money. And Jim said, well, you just told me they do owner financing, right? And my dad said, yes. And he said, he said, the owner said he'd do 10% down, correct? My dad said, yes. And so Jim said, well, what's your commission on this, Mike? My dad said 5%. So Jim said, okay, I'll make a deal with you. I'll put down 5%. You roll in your commission, buy the building together. So that's what they did. They utilized this great owner financing and they bought this building for 10% down. Now, I happen to know that they bought this building in 1976 for $110,000. Now, my dad's portion was his commission, right? $5,500. So I'm standing here in this bank line and I'm holding this check for $6,000. And I started to think, wow, what is the ROI, the return on investment on a $5,500 investment with a return of $6,000? And I thought, wow, that's over 100%, isn't it? Amazing. But then I thought about that. I thought, wait a second, that's not the right way to figure out an ROI, because in real estate, we always talk about in annualized numbers, correct? So if you look at it as an annualized number, well, that $6,000 was really over 12 months, $72,000, right? And I thought, wow, that's amazing, a $5,500 investment with an annual return of $72,000. And I started to figure out the ROI on that. I said, wait a second, that's not right either, because you're only looking at 1 year. And I happen to know that this building's been paid for 20 years. And it's had 20 years of positive cash flow. Now, I've been doing the books for almost all that time, so I know it hasn't been $6,000 a month, but on average, over the last 20 years, it was $4,000 a month. So if you look at the $4,000 a month a year, that's $48,000 a year, isn't it? Times 20 years, that's $960,000. Think about that, a $5,500 investment with a $960,000 return, almost $1 million. So I started to figure out the ROI on that. And I said, wait a second, that's not the right way to look at it either. Because what about the first 20 years, right? I mean, even though the building wasn't paid off, that was the beautiful part of real estate. Remember, it's self-funding and therefore self-sustaining. So you got to consider all those dollars that came in to pay off the asset, right? So then I went and I checked my dad's books because he kept great records, because I was curious to find out exactly how much that building had brought in. And over the first 20 years, it averaged about $2,000 a month, right? For 240 months, well, that's $480,000. Now you add that to the $960,000, well, that's $1,440,000. And I thought, okay, now I've got all the numbers. So I started to calculate out what 5,000 ROI would be on a $5,500 investment with a $1,440,000 return. And then I thought, wait a second, that's not right either, because we're only talking about the cash flow with that. And as we know, real estate has multiple streams of income, doesn't it? I mean, there's tax advantages like crazy, right? 1031s, write-offs, depreciations, all these different things you can do with taxes. I didn't even want to try and tackle that. I'm going to leave that for the CPA. But what about the big dog? What about appreciation? I mean, that's where people make real money in real estate. So I happen to know that this building they paid $110,000 for is currently valued at $2.7 million. Now, think about that for a minute. But wait a second. Remember, my parents didn't have the full $11,000 to put down. My dad didn't have any money. It was his $5,500 commission. So that $2.7 million, well, half of that equity would belong to my parents. That's still $1,350,000. Now, if you add that to the $1,440,000 of cash flow, well, we now have $2,790,000. So I thought, okay, now I've got every dollar I need to figure this out, every dollar that's come in over the past 40 years. So what is the return on investment on a $5,500 investment with a return of $2,790,000? And just as I was about to figure that out, I thought, wait a second, that's not right either. Because next month there's another check for $6,000, and the month after that, and the month after that. So what is the return on investment, the ROI on that $5,500 investment with a return of $2,790,000 and counting? I'll tell you what it is. It's true financial freedom. It's true wealth. What is true wealth? It's financial peace of mind. It's safe, secure, dependable cash flow. It's money you can count on month after month, year after year, decade after decade. So there's about 600 people listening to this today. And statistically, 60% of you feel somewhat confident about having enough money for a comfortable retirement. But only 18% of you feel very confident you have enough money to retire. Royal LePage asked me to be here today because they want their agents to be part of the 18%. My parents were part of that 18%. My family is part of that 18%. My clients are part of that 18%. Today, I'd like you to think about something. Everybody listening to this has spent thousands of dollars and countless hours learning how to make a living in real estate. I'd like you to consider spending just a few more dollars and a few more hours and learn how to create true wealth. I titled my book Destination Perpetuity because the word perpetuity means an annuity with no end or a stream of cash that lasts forever. I thank you very much for your time. And as Mike said, I'll be here for questions and answers if anybody has anything.
Yeah, so I'll tell you, Craig, the chat got really quiet. there, which is usually a sign of just people. And there's one comment that has come in just saying this is one of the best webinars and learning services is offered. So I'm going to thank you for that because they're giving us the credit.
Oh, great. Well, I'm glad it was somebody was enjoying it. That's fantastic. I really enjoyed writing the book, and I've gotten a lot of nice feedback from it. And I hope if some of your agents like it and they want to take a look at it, they can go to my website, destinationperpetuity.com. I'll send you the link, and they can pick up the book there if they like.
Yeah, we're going to send that out as well with the recording. And one thing that I thought, I'll be honest with you, I was really excited for in terms of this presentation was that everybody here who's watching this, who's going to watch the recording, it's almost a two-folded piece for them, because not only did you talk to them as realtors and talk about saying, again, like your dad being a realtor and what he did, but you also talk to, some of the people who are here today in this webinar have prospective investors in their database, people who they know could do this stuff, and they might not have been able to convince them or say, hey, you know what, let's do this, let's go. And you've kind of empowered everybody here today in this webinar with the tools to say, hey, here, you want to lay it out, look, you could lay this out for them. Well, so that's really cool.
I've gone to quite a few realtor conventions here in the U.S. And when I go and I speak, I find a lot of times agents will buy sometimes 5, 6, 8, 10 copies of my book, and they use it as a farming tool. And they send it to their clients to get them excited about buying income-producing real estate. It's something I'm really passionate about. It's something that I've been watching my whole life, as you now know, and something that I've helped a lot of clients with. And it is important to understand how to invest properly. So if anybody has an interest, they want to pick up the book. The other thing, my other book that you mentioned, Learn It, List It, Sell It, that one's not quite done yet, but that book in particular is going to instruct agents on the nuances of getting into selling income producing real estate. And I don't focus on shifting your entire career, but more adding the skill set. I noticed that in the different offices I've been over the years, a lot of agents would always come to me and they'd say, hey, Craig, I know you sell income, and I have this client that wants to buy a 3-unit building. Can we work together, or can you give me a referral fee? I can't tell you, Mike, how much business I've gotten over the years simply because it's a niche market that I service that other agents don't. Other agents sometimes became a great source of business for me because they were a little intimidated by the product. And you really shouldn't be, because it's not that much different than what we sell today as just residential real estate agents. And, quite honestly, every time you open up the MLS, you open up to amazing amount of potential investments that could be lifelong investments, like the ones that my parents held. And those investments are just sitting there waiting to be discovered. And I love the fact that people get excited about it and they start looking for it and start looking for that potential, because it's just waiting for you.
Awesome. Yeah. And now the questions are starting to flow in. So get ready for that. I told people, I said, I got Craig until 3. So he's my prisoner.
Yeah, no problem. I'm here. Go for it. What do we got?
First question we got, which is a real simple one, is how much is the book? And that's coming from Tanya Simpson out at Royal LePage, Royal City.
Well, let's see. It's in the US it's $24.95. So I'm guessing in Canada that's maybe about $30 or $31, something like that.
Sounds about right. Yeah, so there you go. So that's first easy. We'll start it off with that. The next question I have is, do you recommend investing only in multi-units or also single-family homes? What about condos? Now, that is coming from Valentina Kenny. She's from Royal LePage Atlantic out on the East Coast.
Well, hi, Valentina. I think by far the best investment is multifamily for a few reasons. One, the more units you have, we sometimes refer to them as doors. The more doors you have, the less risk you have. In other words, if you invest in a multifamily home or a condo and you have 1 unit and it goes vacant for a month or 2 or 3 or 4, you have no income coming in. But if you have a 3 or 4 unit building and 1 unit goes vacant, you've only lost 1/3 or 1/4 of your income. So there's an economy of scale with multifamily that is really, it sort of insulates you from downtimes.
Nice. And Tanya's follow-up question is just, where are you from?
Oh, I live in Redondo Beach, California.
Yeah, so much warmer. We didn't want to talk about it because a lot of people on the call were from Ottawa, and we were like, "Wait, let's not bring up weather."
Yeah, we're a little
Um,
spoiled here with the weather.
so one question that I have that's I think is a really good one is in Toronto, it's really difficult to find properties that are cash flow positive. So what do you suggest in the case where you're saying, hey, these are really hard to find? Now that's coming from Sandra Sheffield. She's from Royal LePage Real Estate Services Limited in the Toronto area, obviously. So,
Hi, Sandra.
so just
and I can answer that question because everything is everything's relative, isn't it? So in the area I'm in right now, we work off of, and my book talks about cap rates, and I'm sure you're familiar with cap rates. And if you're not, please read my book and get familiar with them. So everything, when you talk about income producing real estate, you talk about in cap rates. So when I work with an investor, the first thing I always say to them is, what are you looking for? Are you looking for cash flow or are you looking for appreciation? They always say both, right? But you have to really boil it down, because in some areas that I work in, like the closer to the coast, our cap rates may only be 2 or 3%, but the appreciation is 8% annually. So that's where you make your money. If somebody wants to cash flow, I take them inland to another area, like our Long Beach area or some other areas, Lawndale, Hawthorne. You don't probably know all these areas, but these areas are a little bit inland, and there the numbers sort of reverse. You can get a cap rate of 8%, but your appreciation is going to be more like 2. So it's risk equals reward. You have to decide what type of investor you are and what type of investment you'll go after. So I would imagine if you're in an area that has a really low cap rate, in other words, the properties are so expensive they don't cash flow well, you probably have great appreciation in that area, is what I'm guessing. And so what you have to do maybe is look outside of your comfort zone if you want cash flow to an area that's not quite as desirable. Does that make sense?
I'm going to turn to Sandra for that. I think it made sense to me.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good. Yeah. I mean, I think that and you got to kind of read the book to grasp some of the concepts in there. But really, it's a matter of determining what type of investor you are and what type of investment you're looking for. So if you're looking for cash flow and you're looking in an area where the price per square foot or the cap rate is so unfavorable, you might have to look into a different area.
Yeah, I was thinking that too. So I'm noticing the other questions. Just one quick comment from Craig Armstrong, who's from Royal LePage team out in the Ottawa area, and he said, I think I'm fairly comfortable. However, I'm looking to invest in income producing properties for my three children's future. Thanks, Craig. So good to hear that. I think your message spoke very clearly to these people. I'm getting a lot of comments, just people who say like, I really enjoy this webinar, and it's
great.
Yeah. I got a couple questions. Self-employed realtor. I have limited access to mortgage since I already own properties. What's your suggestion on expanding my portfolio? Joint venture ? And are commercial properties more risky than residential income properties? What's your opinion on that? Now that's coming from Kathy Kim. Kathy Kim is from Royal LePage Terre Equity, again here in the Toronto area. There's a lot of questions about risk in Toronto, eh?
Yeah, great questions, Kathy. So the one in commercial. Is it riskier? I think so. I own 2 commercial buildings myself. I prefer owning multifamily. I make my cap rate is better on commercial, but again, risk equals reward. So I have a balanced portfolio of multifamily and commercial. Commercial becomes riskier when the economy becomes riskier. So when the economy shifts, if you have a commercial property and the particular business that's in your commercial property, if they're affected by the shift in the economy, you could be in trouble. What happens with multifamily is you just don't seem to have that. I mean, if you're in a desirable area that it has good employment, good schools, good hospitals, all that, you're probably never going to be too dark. I mean, I don't know the market up there, but in LA, one thing we never hear ever is rents are going down. And it just doesn't happen. And so in my book, I talk about income producing real estate being recession resilient. And it truly is. We had such a huge downturn in 2010 here in our economy, 2008, 2009, 2010. And, real estate prices plummeted. The stock market plummeted. I mean, it was worldwide. I know you felt it as well. But what didn't get affected in our area was multifamily. And what happened was really interesting, because as people were literally and sadly losing their homes, What happened? The renter pool got bigger. So the people that own multifamily, although the value of their real estate dropped significantly, if you didn't have to sell it, if you could hold on through the recession, what happened is you actually made more money because rents went up because there was a bigger pool of rentals. So I really believe in the multifamily sector, but I think that commercial is a good way to go too. You just have to be a little more careful with commercial and really think it through and really be on top of the economy and who you're renting to and how they look like as a credit risk.
Nice. Let me see. What do I have next here? That's from, okay. The next question I have is actually an interesting one. Have you ever explored the opportunity to do private lending for investors? If so, do you believe the ROI would be higher than investing in real estate yourself? That's a little tricky one.
It is tricky. I know people that do it. It's not something that I'm interested in. You know, I try and stay pretty focused within my wheelhouse, and I'm pretty comfortable. I think the private money lenders, they make a lot of money, but they take a lot of risk, and not my thing. But certainly there's great opportunity there. But that's a completely different path.
I was looking at the question. I thought, but I'm trying just to ask the questions that the audience is asking, and I thought that's an interesting one. Just looking into another question there. One question I have here, and I think it's actually, this is a really, really good question, and it might actually be the last question we have right now. We'll see if others come in, but Robert Pugh. Boy, I'm not good at saying names, but he says someone approaching a retirement. You talked about all this. Are there any tweaks that you would suggest? And that's coming again also from the Ottawa area, Royal LePage Performance. A lot of Ottawa, Toronto questions here.
Yeah, that's a great question, Robert. And yes, as a matter of fact, I've had the pleasure of doing this for quite a while. And I'll give you one example. I had one couple come to me, and they were probably about 24, 25 when they started. And I wasn't much older. I was maybe in my early 30s. And we invested in some properties in really really desirable areas. So no cash flow, basically. And they built their appreciation. And after about 10 or 12 years, maybe a little bit longer, 15 years, they were getting closer to an age they wanted to retire. And so what we did was we took all of those properties that after a decade or a decade and a half were equity rich, but still not cash flowing. We took those properties and we sold them all. In the United States, we have what's called a 1031 tax exchange. So you can sell a property, income property, and not pay any income tax on it. You can defer the income tax, I should say. And so they were able to take those properties and transfer the equity in those properties that had just gained great appreciation into properties that would cash flow better. And so literally within less than a year, I sold 3 or 4 properties and tripled their cash flow by simply moving, taking something that was a very high appreciation, low cap rate area into something that was a lower appreciation, high cap rate area. In other words, getting cash flow and getting ready for their retirement. So I think it's really, to get people ready for retirement, I think it's always wise to offer a portfolio review. And if you understand how to analyze a property and how to analyze the cash flow on a property, you can really help people get in a better position to retire.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Robert Pugh. And he corrected me on the name but thanks so much for that. I think that's a solid question.
Yes.
And really awesome. Now I have couple comments from Angie Peters, and the one is just saying, thanks so much for the reminder that it was such a good thing to take the leap over 15 years ago as a single parent with limited income to start purchasing property. Again, just
so Angie, and I just build on that a little bit. First of all, I was a single parent for many years too, so congratulations. It's no easy task, especially when you sell real estate. But let me speak to that real quick. Angie, if you're in a position that you can buy something, what you might want to think about buying is a little multifamily. That's what I've had a lot of single parents or folks that didn't have a lot of money to work with come to me. And what we've done is we put them into duplexes or triplexes. So they live in one unit and they rent out 2 or 3 others. And it's a great way to build equity a lot faster. And a lot of times, at least the U.S., the lender will look at the income from a property, the historical income, and they'll let you use that as part of your, in a sense, as part of your down payment, because they'll see those dollars have a history of coming in, and they'll acknowledge those dollars as future earnings for you. So it's a great way to buy to buy a piece of property where you're letting your tenant fund maybe a half or maybe even 2/3 of it, and you're also able to buy a larger piece of real estate because the lender will see you as having more money after the purchase, more cash flow.
You might get mad at me, but that's not even her question.
Oh, okay.
She has another question on top of it.
Okay, I thought that was a question. Well, I hope somebody liked that answer.
It was awesome. And her question is, using vendor financing and assuming mortgages are more difficult now, any suggestion about helping clients get such financing? So I actually thought you somewhat answered the question a little bit there.
Yeah, well,
that
is a partial answer to it. That is how the same answer. You can use the historical income from a property. Let's say for fun that you find a little triplex that's been bringing in $3,000 a month. Well, you're going to live in one unit, right? And so the lender may look at that and say, well, you make X number of dollars annually, but this property has been bringing in $36,000 a year. So maybe they'll say, we'll give you half of that and really kind of almost as a future income for you. So that is a very good way to do it if you're going to own or occupy the property. That's one way to do it. Lending is really hard on these properties, and it's kind of a good thing that it is, because when people are allowed to borrow more money than they should be, they get into trouble. So what I really encourage people to do if they don't have enough money is to create a partnership. And you have to be really careful with that, because if you do create a partnership, you have to do it with somebody you really trust. And even if you trust them, if it's your mother, your father, your son, your best friend, whoever, you have to put everything in writing, and you have to have clear strategies, and you have to have a clear exit strategy as well. That's almost the most important piece. But it's a great way to build equity and to get, because it is expensive to get in. And that's how my dad did it when he started. That's how I did it when I started. That's how a lot of my clients have done it as well, is just to form partnerships and let the equity start to grow.
Nice. And I think two more questions. So one of them on this, and then the other one on and then another one that I think is a perfect question to wrap it up with. So the first question I have is, I have 3 properties and one has a lot of equity built up. Do you think it's worth to sell for profit to have more cash flow and buy cheaper projects in the multiples to generate more cash flow? So that comes from Stephen Pargeter from Royal LePage, your community, again in the Toronto area.
Okay, Stephen, so that's a great question. So what you need to do is you need to look to see how hard your equity, the equity you have in that property is working for you. In other words, take a good hard look at what your cap rate really is now. I mean, you had a specific cap rate when you bought it, but that's changed a great deal. So how hard is your money working for you? And is it working in the market that you're in? So I don't know where your property is, but what you need to do is understand the cap rate of that market. And then you need to understand how hard your money is working. In other words, what your personal cap rate is at the time. So if you always want a highest cap rate as possible, right? So if you're in an area where, say, the cap rate is 7, but when you calculate how your money's working for you in that market, if it comes out to a 4, it could be time to sell and diversify. And I really like diversifying. I have a portfolio of 6 properties now, and I'm probably going to retire in about 6 or 8 more years, and I maybe buy 1 more property. I don't want to be too heavily vested in real estate and responsibilities, but I do think that diversifying is very important. All kinds of things can happen to a single property. So if you have 2 or 3 properties in 2 or 3 markets that you can easily drive to, and I try and have stuff that is no more than about 30-40 minutes away. My furthest property takes me an hour to get to. I like to keep things in different marketplaces and different types of properties. I think diversifying is very, very important. But look at how the equity is working in that property. Probably the largest property I have, when I have the most money in, the cap rate is perfect. It's working perfectly because my dollars have been keeping up with that market. That's not always the case. When the appreciation outpaces the cap rate, then it's time to think about transferring. Oh,
Thank you.
One more thing on that I'll add too,
Yep.
Stephen, before I forget. The other thing you can do, if you really love the property, perhaps what you do to avoid paying some of the big tax hits and to leave a good property that you have a good tax basis on, all that, is a lot of people will just suck some equity out of it and then go buy another piece of property. And that's a great strategy as well.
Nice. So that leaves me with one last question that I think is the best to wrap it up on. And I think I'd like a quick, little brief thought on this. One of the questions that came in is, in terms of the book, and a lot of people are asking where to buy the book, and a couple of people have mentioned in the chat, you can get it at Chapters and Amazon. You can go to destinationperpetuity.com as well. That's why I'm leaving it up there. You can go find it on there as well. But in terms of the book, in terms of the US and Canadian market, how specific does that book get on the US market? Would the content apply well to the Canadian market as well? And that comes from Eliza Hajjasek from Royal LePage Estate, again, here in Toronto. And I think that's a great way to end the webinar, to just give a brief, I think I'm getting a feeling that a lot of these questions that have answers in the book. And I thought it'd be a great way to end the webinar and have a brief little summary of the book itself.
That's a great question. And the answer is the elements of the book are universal. You can invest anywhere in the world. I've invested in different states, in different countries. The basic parameter. I wrote the book as a journey. The book, it takes the reader who's never ever thought about owning income producing real estate and shows you step by step how to build a portfolio of income producing properties that can and will carry you through generations of income. And that's what my parents did. Their portfolio was then handed down to their children, their grandchildren, their great grandchildren. It is an amazing way to make money. And all of the programs that I've outlaid in there, everything you can do, you can translate it to the Canada market, any market, because things don't change. I mean, there's simple rules of the road, if you will, of smart investing, and it's nothing. It's nothing that is really revolutionary. What I've tried to do with this book is simplify everything and take out some of the fear of investing, because it really is, if you take the time to do it right and you do it smart, you'll have an investment that will carry you throughout your retirement and beyond. And rules apply here in Canada, anywhere.
Exactly how I wanted to end this. And I think it's a great way to say, a lot of people are saying thanks and saying, the great info. A lot of people seem really motivated to, like I said, get into this and encourage your clients to get into this as well. And so I thought, what a great way to end the webinar and to wrap it up with your final comments on that. The book, Learn It, List It, Sell It. When do you expect that to be, or do you have a date, or are we saying that, or?
It's right now, it's with the editor, and then it has to go to the, and then it's going to go to the graphic artist, and then it's going to go to the, and then it'll go to the publisher. And it's actually, I think this book might go on steroids a little bit. It might become a course, a 10-week course. And if it does that, I've got a little bit more time. But I can say safely that it'll be out late spring, early summer. And I'd love to, when I get a first edition, I'll send you one, Mike. And if it's something that's of interest, love to do another webinar for you guys.
That sounds awesome. I'm booking you already. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Thank you, Craig. And we hope we see everybody else, everybody for next month's Sales Success webinar.
All right. Thanks so much, Mike. And good luck to everybody there. Hope you have a wonderful day.